Today we're in Van Buren, Arkansas. Population, well, depending on who you ask, it could be 25,000, it could be as high as 33,000. Again, depending on who you ask. I'm your host with the most, Lamont at large. Today in Van Buren, we're going to discuss some of the few crimes that may not make it into the lexicon, if you will, of everyday America. Towns like this, smaller towns, not much in population. Bad things happen here, just like bad things happen in bigger cities. Maybe not at the same clip, but they do happen. So without further ado, let's get right into the video and take a walk with me down the street here in Van Buren, Arkansas. Now, as you can tell, there's not that many people here on the street. As a matter of fact, there's practically nobody here on the street. So Van Buren, this would be the tourist area. This place could be, I wouldn't say busy, but it'll be happening, if you will, when the weather is cooler. Now, you're not gonna get a lot of people coming out here at this current time to shop in the many interesting shops on this street because, well, right now it's 98 degrees and we got about 90% humidity. And I thought, well, what better time than now to go ahead and make a video about this place. So not a whole lot of history to Van Buren, Arkansas. How did it get its name? Well, it was named after the 8th president of the United States of America. That would be Martin Van Buren. This is the third time that this place has been closed. When I came here before, this is an arcade. I guess they're only open on Friday. I was really wanting to play some good old-fashioned arcade video games. Anyways, Van Buren was primarily used in the 1800s as kind of like not a seaport, that's not the word I want to use, but you know, it is on the river. So this place was used to drop off supplies during the Civil War between the Union and the Confederacy. And you had many battles in and around these very hills and valleys. It was incorporated in 1845. And for the most part, you have Fort Smith, which I will be doing a future video because there's a lot more stories happening in Fort Smith than there is in Van Buren. But I wanted to do this video in Van Buren just because it's a smaller town and it's going to be more of a challenge to find interesting stories, which I already have. This right here is the Crawford County Courthouse. This is the oldest courthouse west of the Mississippi that's still used in daily operations. If you get into a little bit of trouble, you're gonna have to see a judge here in this very building. September 13th, 2011, one James Ray Palmer comes to the courthouse because, well, he has a bone to pick with Judge Gary Cottrell. I don't know why, but he has a problem with it. So he comes into the courthouse and he goes up to the courtroom, and the secretary for Judge Cottrell was there, and he says, "Oh yeah, excuse me, do you know where the Honorable Gary Cottrell is?" And she says, "Yeah, he left for the day." And he says, "Well, that's a shame." And he pulls out a gun and starts shooting up the place. He struck the secretary once in the leg. Within the next 5 minutes, a barrage of gunfire takes place. Estimated 70 to 90 shots were fired. It might have took maybe about 5 minutes for the Crawford County Sheriff's Department to come to the scene. And right in front of the courthouse right here, this is where a firefight ensued between James Ray Palmer and a couple of deputies. The good guys won, the bad guy lost. He was struck multiple times. He was taken to an area hospital where he was later pronounced dead. Now, prior to that, this building, which is a historic building, their front door was never locked. So if you wanted to come see a historic building Sunday at 11 p.m. at night, the door was open. Now, of course, the courtrooms are going to be locked up, but you can come into this building and just check it out. Now, ever since that shooting, now they lock the doors, I believe around 5:30 p.m. Now, I was asking myself, how did this guy get into this building with 2 guns and a rifle hidden underneath his trench coat? Well, the entrance to the courthouse, which is right there, there was no metal detector at the time. Now, there's metal detectors upstairs going into the courtroom, but there was no metal detector downstairs, so he just easily went right in. Well, now there's a metal detector at the entrance. So hopefully nothing like that will happen ever again, but this is Van Buren. Not a lot happens out here, but stuff does happen out here. This right here is Lee Creek Park. We're only about maybe a couple blocks away from the courthouse. Now, if you're a vagrant here in Van Buren, then this is going to be the perfect spot for you to drink your booze, do your drugs, and just kind of lay low from the law. Or you could just be a dog and just want to come out here and jump in the river. We're going to go back to February 15th of 2021. So a man by the name of Benny Billy, local vagrant, goes into the sheriff's department and he says, hey, there's a dead body here at the park. So authorities, they come out here, come to the park, and somewhere in the, I guess you can call it the tree line area, a place where you're gonna be able to set up a tent where nobody, law enforcement ain't gonna see you. When deputies start getting closer to the tent, they get that really overpowering stench of decomposition. Sheriff's deputies were unable to positively identify the woman in the tent simply because the advanced state of decomposition, and for the fact that nobody really knew who she was, or well, at least her real name. One of the vagrants that lived in the encampment that they interviewed was one Ricky Newman. So they're talking to Ricky Newman and they're asking him if he knew the woman in the tent. And he says, yeah, I met her at the mission in Van Buren, and we linked up and we hung out for a little while. So they ask him if he can come down to the station so they could interview him. So he goes down to the station, and this guy's pretty relaxed. He's pretty calm, he's mellow. He's not giving off any weird vibes or anything like that. So he says, I hung out with her a few times, and we had went about a week and a half ago to the liquor store to go get some cigarettes and wine. Now, as we're walking on the train tracks right here, we meet a couple other guys, train riders, train hoppers, people that hop trains, freight trains across the country. And he says, I met up with 3 guys on the tracks. I didn't know them. I don't know their real names. One was named Psycho. The other called himself Snake, and the other one called himself Copper. So we're all hanging out. Everyone's huffing. The girl who he only told the deputies, that he only knew her as her handle of Hard Hat. So he said Hard Hat, which is the dead woman in the tent, Psycho, Snake, and Copper, they're all huffing, but he doesn't partake in the huffing. So they're huffing and they start talking about how they're freight hoppers, freight train guys, whatever. And she says that she's a part of of this thing called the FRTA or the FTRA. I'm not sure what that stands for, but that's some kind of association or a club of these guys that hop on freight trains in and around the country. So as the deputies are trying to figure out who her true identity is. He's not giving off any kind of weird vibes. He just says, we hung out, and that's it. So he leaves the sheriff's station, and the deputies, they're thinking to themselves, okay, this guy, obviously he has a close connection to her. He might possibly be one of the last people that was seen with her alive. So we'll keep him on the radar, but we'll start talking to these different guys here at the park, and we'll figure something out. So the deputies come back, and they're interviewing countless vagrants, and they're not making any headway in this investigation. Now, they can't find this guy they called Psycho, and they can't find this guy called Snake, but there is a guy named Copper, but Copper's long gone. Copper's ghost. Copper jumped on one of these trains and just headed out of town. So word gets around that Ricky Newman is getting ready to leave town. Now, they want to stop this guy before he leaves because he is a person of interest, not necessarily a suspect yet, definitely a person of interest. So while they're doing that, they finally identify the woman in the tent as 46-year-old Marie Chalette. Now, she did have a little bit of a criminal record. She was arrested here in Crawford County for, I want to say it was either vagrancy or public intoxication. So she only did 1 day in jail, and that was it. And she did have a boyfriend at the time, but the boyfriend didn't get out of jail with her because he had been rebooked on an assault charge on one of the jailers at the jail. So now they have a positive ID. This woman had a good job. She worked for Lockheed up in Bremerton, Washington. And one day she just got a, divorce from her husband, bad marriage or what have you. And then she just decided to leave. I don't know if there's any mental illness involved right there, but her family has said that she would basically kind of just roam around the country, dating different guys, doing whatever. So when they get Ricky Newman back into the interview room, his demeanor has changed. Where the first time he was pretty relaxed, kicking back, had his feet up, had his hands behind his head, just totally relaxed. Now this time he looks like he's stressed. He has bloodshot eyes. He hasn't been sleeping very good. He's probably been drinking, and he's nervous. And the deputies are kind of wondering what's going on with this guy. So at first, they're asking him, did you have anything to do with this crime? Because now, when the autopsy report comes back about Marie Chalette, she was horribly mutilated. It was almost like they tried to do an autopsy on her. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, he says, I did it. I killed her. And they say, okay, tell us what happened. And he says, well, I have this entity in me, and he's called Seco. And Seco comes out when Ricky gets threatened, when he feels threatened, and Ricky felt threatened by Marie for something or another. So I killed her, and I carved her body up just to make sure that she was dead. Now at this time, they had took blood and hair samples from Ricky. So he basically writes a statement saying that he, in fact, is the one that's responsible for her death. They immediately book him, take him to the jail, and charge him with, amongst other things, first-degree murder. Now, this guy, Ricky Newman, he wants the death penalty. He says he wants to die. Now, he does have somewhat of a record of mental illness. He was a former Marine, but he was only in the Marines for about a year, and then he was honorably discharged. So that tells me that maybe the Marines felt that he was having some mental issues and they didn't want to get him a dishonorable, so they just said, hey, we'll wash our hands of you. So he gets incarcerated. He's going to trial. Now, normally when murderers, when they're going to trial, They're allowed to wear, normal street clothes like a suit. And during the court proceeding, during the trial, they're not going to be shackled because, they don't want to give the jury the impression that these guys are straight criminals, whatever the proper terminology is. But Ricky refused. He said, no, I don't want to wear a suit. I'm going to wear the orange jumpsuit. And also I want to represent myself. And I'm like, okay. And he says, no, and I want to be shackled because I don't want Seco to come out and harm anybody. So it only took about a day for the jury to find this guy guilty of murdering Marie Chalette. And he's instantly, he wants the death penalty. He wants to die for his crime. So they gave him the death penalty. So Ricky has a date with death, and that date is scheduled for July 26, 1995. Now, the execution would have took place just as it was scheduled, except just at the last minute, Ricky Newman allowed his court-appointed attorneys to file for a stay of execution. Because you see, Ricky is innocent. He didn't actually kill her, as the story goes. And as the attorneys are digging into the case, they quickly realize that, well, a lot of the stuff that the prosecution used in the case against him was not necessarily true. Number one, his written statement when he admitted to the crime, well, he was giving details of the crime that didn't match up to what actually took place. Oh, and also his hair and DNA didn't match the blood that was on the blanket that was covering the body of Marie Chalette when they found her dead. And also the history of mental illness comes into play. So now it looks like we're gonna have a new trial going on for this guy. The family of Marie feels that Ricky killed her and that he's just nuts. That's all there is to it. He says he didn't do it. Maybe he was coerced into doing it. Maybe it was his alter personality. Who knows? So in 2017, after spending about 16 years on death row, Ricky Newman was finally released and a free man. The prosecutor in the case declined to refile charges because then the admission of his guilt that when he told the deputies that he killed her, that was going to be thrown out. So if you're throwing out the confession and they don't have any physical evidence, they don't have a case. So currently right now, I don't know where Ricky Newman is, but last thing I read was that he said that after his release, that he was not going to be in the area, that he was going to leave and go somewhere else. And that was about, 7 years ago? So now who knows where he's at now, but a possible sadistic killer is out there on the streets. And the question remains, if he didn't kill Marie Chalette, who did? A lot of people nowadays don't really read the newspaper, and if they do, they read the digital online version. You'll find very few people, if any, that still actually read a physical newspaper. As a matter of fact, one of my best friends, Danny, he's the only person I know that still actually reads a newspaper. And when you own a newspaper, especially back in the days, that was a pretty big deal. If you owned the newspaper, not saying that you had a lot of power, but you could be quite an influential person, even in a small town like Van Buren, Arkansas. Meet the Parks, Hugh and Rui Ann Park. They were the former owners of the Van Buren newspaper, the Press Argus. And Rui Ann, she kind of fancied herself almost like a socialite / debutante. She was a former school teacher, a historian, and she actually traced her family lineage to the Mayflower. Now, the Parks, they had a son. His name was Sam Hugh. And they decided when Sam was about 5 years of age that they were going to adopt a daughter. And they adopted a shy little 7-year-old girl. Her name was Linda. Now, not much is known, for me anyways, about the relationship between Linda and Ruianne, but it was not a good one. I don't know if there was any kind of physical abuse, but there sure was a lot of mental abuse. You see, Linda, she could never quite compare to Ruianne's son, Sam Hugh. He was so much smarter than her, so much this, so much that. I mean, she would probably throw it in her face every time she could when their kids would bring their report cards back home. Well, Sam Hugh got straight A's and you didn't. And that relationship would continue on between Linda and her mother for quite some time. Eventually, the brother and sister, they would end up going to school at the University of Arkansas up in Fayetteville. So after they were done, Sam Hugh comes back to Van Buren, and he went to school for law. So he becomes the youngest United States prosecuting attorney of the 5th District here in Van Buren. Pretty good, huh? I bet you that Ruianne was really proud. Linda, well, I'm not really sure what Linda did, but she married an attorney and she moved 3 hours away to a city called Cabot, not very far outside of Little Rock, and she had children. Okay, so eventually the Parks, they would get a divorce and they would go their own separate ways. And, well, Ruianne, she would spend the rest of her days in that house right up there, right up on top of that hill. And we're going to be walking up to that house right now. So Sam Hugh, the apple of Ruianne's eye, had a little bit of a, I guess you would say, a bad habit, if you will. You see, like back in the days when, you were a United States prosecuting attorney in the 5th District of Van Buren, it was, you're in the South, it's kind of frowned upon to live your life in a weird, unusual, or quote unquote queer way. And Sam Hugh was gayer than a $7 bill. And one thing that he loved more than being gay and dating guys was alcohol. That was his problem, was not necessarily being gay, even though it was kind of looked down upon back then. It was the alcoholism. This guy was a raging alcoholic. This guy would drink during work. He would drink before work. He would drink after work. And it really destroyed his life, and it destroyed him professionally. He lost his job because he just couldn't put the booze down. So he loses his job, he loses his place, and he ends up moving back in with his mom. Well, she had a couple rental properties, so he rented one of the properties and he opened up his own attorney's office. But remind you, back in the 70s, people ain't clamoring to hire a gay attorney. Now, who cares about him being gay? But things were the way they were back then. But this guy had some weird habits. Other than his drinking, this guy, when you're gay, where do you find other gay guys at? Yeah, you gotta go to the big city. You gotta go to Fort Smith, which is over there. But, sometimes you wanna find it closer to home, so you don't really know who's gay. Oftentimes, and this was when he was working, he would bail out people that had gotten arrested for like vagrancy, kind of like the guys that I spoke about in the other story. He would bail them out and give them odd jobs to do around his house. Hey, my lawn needs mowed, a real lawn. Maybe you might want to take your shirt off if it's too hot. Hey, listen, I'm not telling you what to do. You do what you want to do, kiddo. You do what you want to do. So this guy was just kind of weird like that. But one thing, Sam Hugh, he definitely loved his mother. He definitely loved his mother. On May 17th, 1981, it was like any other day here in Van Buren. Now, when Sam woke up from his usual nightly routine of drinking himself into a drunken stupor, he would go check up on his mom. Now, his mom lived in that house right over there, so we're going to be walking up to it right now. So he goes to check on his mom, and he notices, the first thing that he notices that's kind of weird is the newspaper is still on the porch. Now, the mother woke up early every day, so, you know, it's what, 10:30, 11, 11:30, 12, and that newspaper is still on the porch. So he thought that was kind of strange. So he, he has a copy to the key of the house. So he goes into the house. He opens the door and he calls out his mother's name. He says, "Ma, where you at?" There's no answer. This guy walks into the den, and laying in a pool of her own blood, he sees his mother dead on the floor. Turning the camera around, because nobody wants to see me sweating profusely, he calls 911, and the Crawford County Sheriff's deputies, they arrive to the scene, to this very house right here, which now looks like it's a doctor's office. And in the den, lying dead, is a 75-year-old Rui Ann Park. Now, after investigating the crime scene, they determined that this was not a random crime. This was not a robbery gone wrong. There was no forced entry. Whoever killed her was either invited in or they had access to the property. Now, immediately, the detectives, they felt that Sam Hugh was responsible for murdering his own mother. Why? You know what? As silly as it sounds, because he was gay. Because according to deputies, that's just what gay guys do. They just kill their mother because they're angry, because they're gay, and then they blame their mother, and then they kill them. That's really all there was to it. There was absolutely no evidence that it was him that was responsible for the crime, other than the fact that, okay, he had a key to her house, but so did Linda. But Linda lived 3 hours away, that direction of her in Cabot. So the deputies and the prosecuting attorney for Crawford County, for the next couple of years, they want to pull the trigger and they want to charge Sam Hugh with the murder of his mother. But other than, oh, he's gay. Oh, and also he complained about him having money troubles for a few years, and he would look to inherit this house. That might have been the house where he lived right there. Don't quote me. Actually, those could have been the two houses. So he would look to inherit that, but Sam, he loved his mother. So he wasn't the one that was responsible for the murder, even though the detectives, they felt that, like, oh, this guy's gay, so he killed him. I mean, actually looking that up, it sounds absolutely silly. So over the next 2 years, as this murder goes unsolved, Sam Hugh continues to drink himself into even more of a stupor. So this guy started with half pints and pints. He worked his way up to a fifth. This guy now is ordering whiskey by the gallon. And some days he drinks the whole damn thing, or damn near the whole thing. Probably just passes out drunk and it just falls at his feet and just pours out. He was very, very heartbroken over his mother's murder. Who would murder a woman that had no known enemies. Now, you know, hey, you're not the most likable person by all intents and purposes, but nobody wants to kill you. And at that time in Van Buren, probably 20,000 people. I mean, whoever killed her didn't break in. They were let in or let themselves in. Now, Linda, she had a key, but she's 3 hours away and she had an alibi. So nobody suspected her. They think it's Sam that did it. And he would later end up dying of liver failure about a couple years after her murder. So Sam Hugh dies. And that's it. The case is pretty much closed because they're like, this guy obviously killed his mom. So that's it. So they're not investigating this crime at all anymore. As far as they're concerned, it's solved. The guy that did it is dead, or so they thought. So how did they end up solving this case? Well, a little bit of time after Sam Hugh's death, the husband of Linda comes into the district attorney's office here in Van Buren, and he slaps a tape down on the desk and he says, I got something that you might want to listen to. And as they played the tape, the voice on the recording is Linda, and she's talking about her murdering her mother. She says that, I basically, in so many words, not to quote her word for word, but I killed her. I freaking killed her. They shut the tape off, and immediately they go and arrest Linda and charge her with Rui Ann's murder. So the question is, why did Linda kill her mother? Well, see, what happened was Linda was married to an attorney, and they ended up having, I want to say, 4 children. And she discovered that her husband, I want to say his name was Howard, but don't quote me. But she discovered that her husband was cheating on her. Now, while she's discovering that he's cheating on her, this guy is a very controlling weirdo, right? It gets so bad that when he leaves, he counts the odometer on the car to make sure, like, she's not driving too far away or that she's not cheating. So she would discover later on that he had a mistress and he was, quote unquote, going on a business trip. Yeah, right. So Linda, being stuck with all of her kids, goes out from Cabot out to Van Buren, and she wants to talk to her mother only because she wants her mother to console her. But Rui Ann, she's not that type of woman. She's not a loving mother. She's just kind of a cold, callous woman to her daughter. Not to her son, but to her daughter. So she says, Mom, he's cheating on me. He has a mistress. And she's crying to her mother. She's just looking to be consoled. She becomes the 7-year-old girl yet again, crying to her mother, and she wants her mother to wrap her up in her arms and say everything is going to be okay. But no, Rui Ann says, you shouldn't have married him. You had so many kids. You're stuck. You're stupid. You brought this all on yourself. You don't doll yourself up. This is what happens. You can't keep a man, blah, blah, blah. And she just starts tearing Linda down. And Linda says, F you. And the first thing she sees is a gavel. And I think it's the gavel that, I want to say, I don't know if it was a family heirloom or it was her son's, whatever. So she grabs the gavel and she just smacks the living daylights out of Rui Ann. Bam, bam, smash, 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 smash. Just smashed her skull in with that gavel 10 times, 10 whacks. And then when she's done, she realizes what she's done and there's blood everywhere. So the attack happened in a guest bedroom. So she grabs her mother and drags her corpse. I'm imagining she's dead now. And drags her to the den. And then that's where she leaves her. Right there. And just walks out. And her husband discovered that she was in Van Buren because, remember, he would count the odometer, the mileage on the car. So he sees the mileage when he comes back from his trip is the same mileage that is from Cabot over here to Van Buren. So he tapes his wife without her knowing and he sits on the tape for a while. I don't know how long it was, maybe a year or two. He sits on the tape until he finally decides to turn it in to the DA. This is Rui Ann. This is the woman that was murdered. Sam Hugh, her son who drank himself to death, the attorney over here, and a baby that only lived a day. I'm not really sure where the husband is, but it looks like she's buried next to her family. These are the Smiths right here. So her maiden name would be Smith. So her husband, I mean, they did get a divorce. He's buried somewhere in the cemetery. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure where. So what happened to Linda? Well, the prosecutor, they basically, she gets an attorney and she basically tells the story of why she killed her mother, like how I told you guys. And they charged her with second-degree murder. She ended up getting 20 years in prison. She only did about 4. She got out in the mid-80s, 1985, 1986. She left. That's it. Last time anybody knew, she was living in Florida. She got remarried and has a new life and a new family. And she killed her mother simply because she didn't get the love that she was looking for. And all those years of Rui Ann kind of not showing her attention or just being mean to her, she just snapped. Rest in peace to the baby Rui Ann and her son Sam. November 11th, 1990. 14-year-old Mark Anthony McLaughlin is at home when his mother says, hey, we need something for dinner, and she sends him to the store. A quick errand normally, maybe he'll be back in 20 minutes. So maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever amount of time passes by, Mark hasn't shown back up yet. Now, she's probably figuring he stopped by to play pinball or visit his friends or what have you, but it's dark now and he's still not home. So she calls the police here in Van Buren. And any parent that has ever been in that situation, you start playing scenarios in your mind. How mad you're going to be when your son or daughter shows up at 11 o'clock at night. Oh, sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. I lost track of time. And she's going to be so PO'd. But thank God that he's home safe. Unfortunately, in this case, that did not happen. The next day, right across the border in Oklahoma, in a pond not very far off I-40, the body of Mark Anthony McLaughlin is found in a pond. He had been beaten and shot in the back of the head with a small .22 caliber pistol. Who could have done such a disgusting and abhorrent thing? And this case sounds eerily similar to investigators about a boy from Fort Smith who had died in a similar way in the same location. William Von Eric Domer, 15 years of age. Same caliber weapon, same bruises and marks on his body, looking like he had been beaten with some kind of a wooden blunt instrument. About a month later, here back in Van Buren, Arkansas, Ross Allen Ferguson, 18 years of age, he just gets off of work. He works at a grocery store. He's just about to get into his car when some guy comes up to him, flashes a badge and says he's a police officer and that to put your hands up. He tells him to put his hands against the car, and he searches him, frisks him, does all this, that, and the third, like how normally police officers do. And then he proceeds to put leg irons and handcuffs on him and throws him in the back of his car. It was an unmarked car, very similar to cars that are driven by Van Buren plainclothes detectives. Now, this kid, Ross, he keeps asking this man, like, what the hell did I do? And he's like, oh, well, we've had a bunch of thefts in the area. I'm tired of you young punks thinking that you could just get away with this. And, well, you know, there's going to be hell to pay, blah, blah, blah. So they're driving. And then all of a sudden he gets on the highway and he's driving away from the city. And Ross is getting a bad feeling about this. As Ross is in the back of this car, they're on the highway and they're leaving Van Buren. And Ross is getting a bad feeling about this. And he says, hey, are you really a cop? And the guy says, shut up. You shut up. I'm tired of you punks thinking you can just go around and steal stuff and raise havoc all over the place. We're tired of it. He's continuing to drive him. He doesn't know where the hell he's going. He drives him to a area similar to this, lots of trees. And it's quiet. And he takes him to this secluded area, gets out from behind the wheel, gets into the back with Ross, pulls out what looks like some kind of a wooden stick, like maybe like a plunger or something like that, and proceeds to beat him all over the place. In particular, focusing on the left side of his hip. He's just beating him on that same spot as this guy is handcuffed and he can't move. His hands are handcuffed, his legs are shackled. He orders him out of the vehicle. Now, Ross is now having, you know, when you're in these life and death situations and a flood of memories starts coming back to you, and immediately he remembers the stories that kids would talk about between themselves in the Fort Smith, Van Buren, Arkansas area. And that is of a kid back a couple years ago who was kidnapped and beaten and shot in the head. And just about a month ago, another kid was also found in a similar area that he believes now he is in. So he tells the guy, you're gonna kill me, aren't you? Because now he knows that this is the piece of filth that killed the other two kids. He tells him to shut up. And he tells him keep walking. And as they're walking, all of a sudden he takes out a knife and he stabs him and he stabs him. And he stabs him about 6 or 7 times. And Ross falls down to the ground, face down on the ground. His only thing to do is to pretend that he's dead. So this guy starts dragging Ross down this hill, and there's rocks and sticks, and his face is getting scraped up, but he must remain still. He can't flinch or move. If he does, this guy is going to end him. So he drags him to the pond, and just as he's about to drag him into the pond, all of a sudden he gets up, and the first thing he says is when he gets up that the look of shock and / horror that this guy is on his face. He thought he killed this kid. So immediately he starts running away. Now, a middle-aged guy normally is not going to ever be able to catch a teenager, especially if a teenager is in good shape. But he's shackled, his legs are shackled, and as he was dragging him, for some unknown reason, as he got him to the pond, he takes off his pants to his knees. Now, he doesn't do anything, but he takes off his pants, almost as a way as to bring shame to the victim of the crime. So his pants are coming down, he's shackled, he's trying to run, like adrenaline is pumping. So he makes it up that little hill to the car where the guy kidnapped him in. He opens the door and it's unlocked. He gets in the car and he's locking all the locks. The keys to the car are still in the ignition. He starts that car up and he puts it in the drive. And as he turns around, he sees that creep that tried to kill him. And he turns the car around and he wants revenge. And he tries to run him over. But he had climbed up on some kind of like a little mound, dirt mound. So he couldn't get at him. So he just peels out, just is gone, is ghost. He's driving, he doesn't know where the hell he is. He stops by a house and he jumps out and he's like, help, 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 this guy's trying to kill me, blah, blah. They called 911. They called 911 and immediately the cavalry comes, and within about a few hours, they see this guy walking on the side of the highway. The pervert bastard that tried to kill Ross Ferguson earlier. That man that was walking along the highway was 149-year-old George Kent Wallace. And Wallace was no stranger to authorities. Back from the 1960s, going back to the early 1980s, he had been in and out of prison for multiple kidnappings. They called him the Paddler. This guy would pick up hitchhikers in North Carolina around the High Point, Winston-Salem area, and he would just beat them. The weirdest thing, no sex assault, nothing like that. He would just beat them. And he had done, I think between the early 70s and early 80s in particular, he had been in and out of prison multiple times. This is a guy that should have been never released. So they arrested him and charged him with the attempted murder and kidnapping of Ross Ferguson. And they're looking at his MO and they're quickly summarizing that this guy is a suspect in the murders of Mark Anthony McLaughlin and William Von Eric Domer. And later on, Wallace would confess to those murders. And he took them exactly to the location where their bodies were dumped, and he took them to the location of where he hid the murder weapon that he used to kill both kids. A small caliber .22 pistol, which ballistic tests indicated that this was the same weapon that was used in both of those murders. Also, Wallace had confessed to a couple of murders in North Carolina that we will be speaking about in a future video. At least 4 murders he committed, and he's also suspected of committing a 5th out here, but he never owned up to it. And that also we will be talking about in a future video. So Wallace was extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial for the murders of McLaughlin and Domer, and he was found guilty and sentenced to die via lethal injection. And on August 10th, 2000, the world was rid of a disgusting deviant, a sick monster, a sick bastard. And this is the final resting place of Mark Anthony McLaughlin. Just going to the store and was never seen ever again. This next story does not take place in Van Buren, but we're very close. We're about 8 miles down the road here in Alma. Across the street is like a multi-use industrial baseball field. About 30 years ago, the parking lot where I'm standing on right now, it used to be a baseball diamond. And over here is where the mother of 6-year-old Morgan Nick took her daughter just to go watch a Little League game. It was June 9th, 1995. Little towns like Alma, not much to do, so you have a lot of sporting events involving middle schools and high schools taking place, and it's kind of like a get-together place for the community to come together and just kind of talk about whatever and gossip and whatever else they typically do on a Friday night here in towns this size. Now, the game had ended right at around 10:30 p.m. and, so it's over, and all of the parents and the family members and friends of the Little Leaguers who were playing, they're gathered in this area right here, and they're just talking to each other. So Morgan goes up to her mother and says, "Hey, can I go play with my friends to go catch fireflies?" And she says, "Sure." She's talking to her friends, what have you. So back 30 years ago, up above this hill right over here, that was the parking area where people that would come watch the games at this parking lot, they would park over there. So Morgan they go with her friends. Maybe they're only gone maybe 15 minutes. So they come back, and mind you, they're a bunch of 6 and 8-year-old kids. So Morgan's mom says, "Where's Morgan?" And they said, "We don't know. We left her at the parking lot area. She was taking sand out of her shoes." Morgan's mom walks up to this hill expecting to see her daughter standing next to her car, and she's gone. She's nowhere to be found. Immediately, she's frantic, and she calls the police department, and they're not very far. They're literally like maybe 2 blocks away. Morgan would never be seen ever again. As the days go on and all of Arkansas is looking for 6-year-old Morgan Nick, law enforcement agencies in and around this area of Arkansas is on high alert because there's a missing child, and God only knows where she's at. Now, we fast forward about 2 months later, back in Van Buren, there's a guy driving a red 1986 Chevy pickup truck. And this guy is drunk. He sees an 11-year-old girl walking by a Sonic restaurant in Van Buren and waves cash at her, kind of like a fan, and starts yelling out very, very disgusting, lewd sexual things at her, saying, "If you come home with me, all this money could be yours." So she screams, runs for her life, and immediately she finds her brothers, and they go and call the police. As the guy's taking off, he rounds a corner and he hit a utility pole. Now, when the deputies for the Crawford County Sheriff's Office arrive, they're asking them, did they get a license plate number, a description of the vehicle? Well, they got a license plate number, WJA 385. So they run the plate and nothing comes back. There's no plate with that number. So they jumbled all of the numbers around, and then they finally get a WJA 835, and it comes back to a red 1986 Chevy pickup truck that is owned by one Billy Jack Links, a local sex offender. And coincidentally enough, this was the same vehicle, or at least vehicle description, that was seen at this game. This picture this was taken from a video that somebody was videoing the game, is a older red pickup truck, but it has a white camper shell. So they go to the address of where the truck is registered to, the Billy Jack Lynx. So when they get to his residence, he's drunk. And then they see the truck and they notice that it's damaged. It has damage on it consistent with it crashing into that utility pole. Immediately they arrest him and they charge him with sexual solicitation of a minor. Now, red pickup truck, creepy red pickup truck with a camper, but they can't definitively say if that's the same vehicle or not. One of the neighbors of Lynx did say that they do possibly remember at one time or another that he had a red camper on the truck, but I don't know what the hell that means. Like, if you remember it or you don't, I would think that would be clear as day. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So eventually he's charged and he's sent to prison, and his truck is searched at the time, but all they found in the truck was duct tape, tarp, rope, and a machete. Now, I'm guessing that they didn't really do a very thorough search of the truck. So eventually he's sentenced to prison and he would die there in 2000. Now, later on, the truck had been auctioned off. Somebody buys the truck, and now the FBI and the Arkansas State Police, they're investigating this disappearance. Now, I'm not exactly sure how many years later went by, but they eventually tracked down the owner who bought that red pickup truck from that auction, and they did another search of the vehicle. And this time they found blood on the seat. Of course, it wasn't enough DNA to do a check to see if the DNA matched Morgan's mother. Also, they found these little tiny blue and green fibers, which its consistency goes along with a Girl Scout shirt that Morgan was wearing at the time of her disappearance. Now, Alma police, after the crime occurred, I believe the investigation was taken over by the state police and the FBI. So I don't think they know really much more about what took place, other than when they first investigated it, and then it was pretty much out of their hands. And this story has gained a little bit of traction in the last few years. So the FBI, they're not going to be commenting on it. They claim that they're close to possibly solving this case. But from what you can read online, they believe that the Lynx guy is the one that might possibly be responsible for Morgan's disappearance. There was a composite sketch at the time that was released about this creepy guy in a red pickup truck with a white camper shell, but this guy was never found. And then the Billy Jack Lynx, when he gets arrested down in Van Buren, they put one on one together. But from what I can see, there would be no physical evidence of Morgan being in the truck except for those blue and green fibers, which scientifically speaking, I'm not really sure if they're an exact match, but from what they said, it sounds like it's consistent with the shirt that she was wearing at the time of her disappearance. And almost 30 years later, and she is nowhere to be found.